All right. Good evening. Friday, May 26th, 2023. And time continues to move in the way that it does, if it actually exists, which is another debatable point. So today was a case of what Ajahn Chah called Mine. It's uncertain. There were actually quite a few things that I was, went on around this household and in our surrounding connections that seem to be mine today. So I told my wife who really doesn't like you to even say anything about astrology because she thinks it's really silly. I was like, oh, I think Mercury must be in retrograde. She's like, oh God, don't say that. Just to, bug her. But it's part of being married is you got to bug your. Oh, wow. Yeah, I don't know if you heard that. It's like a big something dropped on the floor upstairs. I know she didn't hear me, but it's all like everything's connected. Okay. Wow, I'm looking so white and bright here. I see. Put on my white sweater. All right, we're going to meditate for 20 minutes. I'm going to give some guidance for about 10, and then it's going to be quiet for about 10, and then there will be a bell. So just settling back into your posture, however you find it most beneficial to sit. I recommend, if possible, to sit upright and on something fairly firm. Sitting on a very soft, like couch can sort of, as the body sinks in, the mind can also sink in and get drowsy. So it's just one recommendation. And just, you can close your eyes or just lower your gaze. So turning the attention inward and just feeling the body as you settle and just feel yourself sitting, making this commitment to stillness. It can be helpful to do some intentional relaxation and scanning of the body, both to relax and to increase your awareness and groundedness in the body. I like to start by relaxing the jaw. It's a place we hold tension, so releasing there. Letting go in the shoulders so there's no kind of hunching up. And softening the belly, letting the breath move deeply into the body, into the belly. Well, there's an overall sense of just letting go through the body. And in that process, we might feel some resistance to letting go. There can be a kind of fear. And we start to notice these underlying tendencies when we start to become mindful. So hopefully you feel that you're in a safe place, and so you can just move through or allow that fear without letting it stop you from releasing the kind of armoring of the body that expresses itself with tension, stress. So just this process of releasing itself can be an insight practice when we get to see something about our mind and body, our nervous system. And so we use the breath in this process of letting go. You might take some deep breaths or just be aware of the breath. Feel how it moves into these spaces in the body. And, the inhalation opens the body, the exhalation releases tension. So they operate together as partners in this process of letting go. And then just letting the breath settle back to a normal movement, letting the attention rest on the breath. So here we can pay attention at the nostrils, the touch of air moving in and out of the body. Or you can use the belly and the diaphragm to just feel the movement rising and falling. First of all, this is just to give us something real, something physical, a sense experience to focus on. The breath is something that is ongoing, always there. So it can be a helpful tool in this regard. And as we work with the breath, we can see that it helps us in other ways. Because of its motion, it's a reminder of impermanence, of constant change. It's often seen as a tool for letting go of stress, tension. Has a naturally healing quality. Many traditions, the breath is seen as a energetic force, can be used to balance energies in the body. When agitated, the breath helps us to become calm. When dull, the breath can brighten us energetically. It's also a useful concentration object. Doesn't have any sort of strongly pleasurable or unpleasant qualities generally, so focusing on it doesn't disturb the mind. You can simply relax and breathe and feel the breathing. We're not trying to cling on to the breath or block out other sense impressions. Breath is our primary focus, but the mind wanders. We acknowledge that and then come back. If there's a noise or another sensation, we can pay attention to that until it passes. Return to the breath. At times, even when we notice thinking and come back to the breath, the thoughts will continue to stream through the mind. So we, again, don't set up a conflict with that. We just feel the breath as the thoughts pass through. Or feel the breath with sounds or sensations or feelings. Letting the breath be a partner to whatever else is drawing our attention. And perhaps we could get to a point or we arrive for a time where there's just breath. We don't need to strive for that. All right. I just sort of was the last couple of minutes there, I was thinking how much I enjoy living a life of sobriety, and one that's, centered on that. And um, when I talk to people who are kind of trying to find their way into recovery, one of my recommendations is always finding a community. And we know there's a lot of resistance sometimes to 12-step programs. Fortunately, we have Dharma recovery is one thing, but I'm sorry, recovery Dharma. Um, pretty soon I'll just be, saying random words, and then you'll know that it's time to turn Kevin off. Okay, I guess he was a good teacher till he lost his mind. But it's just so precious, and it's so important to have a community. That addiction is such an isolating condition that, I mean, even when you're in with people and you have a drunken community, or a drug gang you hang out with, or you have a bunch of buddies at the casino that you gamble with. It's not really, a community of love. Um, and we had some people over for dinner the other night, and this old friend of my wife, and with their kids, who I had not met their kids. I'd met the couple before, and the husband has been sober for a few years now and is working in treatment, so it was nice. And then the 20-year-old daughter piped up at one point and turned to me and was like, "I'm sober too." So I was like, "Oh, cool." So, I love those moments of just like we're having dinner and nobody's like pouring a glass of wine or whatever, which is, I mean, fine if people want to have a glass of wine. I don't have a problem with that, but it's nice to be among, your people. And one of the things I was mentioning that night was about Alan Marlatt, who was a well-known addiction researcher. He is I think one of the first people to really do addiction research, and certainly one of the first to sort of suggest that meditation might be part of that. He got into, I think he did TM and then Shambhala Buddhism. But anyway, he was studying psychology back in the 70s, and told his advisor in his PhD program he wanted to get into addiction studies, and the guy was like, "Don't do that. It's a black hole." I was like, yeah, maybe. But Alan, I think he got in touch with me soon after One Breath at a Time was published. Somehow we got connected. He had a research center at the University of Washington. He's no longer with us, as they say. Passed away a few years ago, but he invited me up there, and when I looked into him, I realized, like, this guy, a lot of his research is trying to discredit 12-step principles, like the phenomenon of craving, things like that. So I was like, it's interesting. He's like wants me to talk to his graduate students, and as I, talked to him and got to know him, I realized, like any good scientist and academic and researcher, he had his ideas and he had his viewpoint, but he was very interested in all the viewpoints and on all the ideas, and wasn't sort of shutting off things. But at one point I interviewed him. I think I interviewed him for Inquiring Mind, the Buddhist magazine. I have to look it up and see if that's just a thought I have. But I remember it was during the 2009 Buddhist Recovery Network conference at Against the Stream in Los Angeles. We were upstairs in the the teacher's office, and I was talking to him about this question of like his thinking around AA, and he said, well, when people finish our program, which was called mindfulness-based relapse prevention, we suggest that they go to a 12-step program because, as he put it, I think the term he used was, because we've discovered, our research shows that social support is really important for maintaining recovery. And I just thought that was so interesting. Like, even though he didn't like really believe in the steps themselves, it was like, yeah, but that's the only place around where you're going to find a bunch of people like you. And you know, and it, you know, I do think that meetings like in AA, for instance, which is like, that was my main program that I got sober in, meetings are actually the most important part of the program. They're more important than the 12 steps, I think, even though I've written a few books about the 12 steps. Maybe I should write a book about meetings. But anyway, you know, when you think about like the way that the program impacts your life, if you're in that program or any kind of recovery program, the way it impacts your life, it's much more the community and the going somewhere and these ritual meetings that we have that carries you forward more than, okay, I'm going to go write the step, or I'm going to think about my inventory, or I'm going to, you know, do some kind of ritual to turn my life over to God or whatever. You know, it's really the community. So it's quite interesting, you know, and you know, in regards to Buddhism, you know, Sangha is one of the three jewels, you know, and the other two are the Buddha and the Dharma, the teachings. So if Sangha is up there with those two things, you see how vital Sangha is in the Buddhist community as well. So it's not a principle, the recovery principle, the social support is not a principle that just applies to recovery. You can see it really as more of a spiritual principle. You know, and I did go to the monastery. I don't know if I said that before, but I actually dropped in on the monastery today. I guess I said it. As I said, memory isn't my greatest thing, so that was like 25 minutes ago. You know, I was planning to spend my weekend up to stay at a hotel and then go to the monastery all day tomorrow. This is for those who are just tuning in. That's Abhayagiri Monastery. I'm going to actually type that into the chat so that people know what I'm talking about. Abhayagiri. I'll talk a little bit about that word in a minute. But and so when I found out that there was COVID there, I called because I had taken a book up for Ajahn Pasano, the sort of emeritus abbot, and so I called and asked if I could still just drop by, and they said, yeah, it's fine, you just, you know, come up and leave it in the mail room or something. But I got there, and the monk who I talked to on the phone saw me and came out and we chatted. And you know, a monastery, especially in the Thai forest tradition, the Sangha is like number one. I mean, that's like what it's built around. And, you know, there's no doubt like the monks being together is so key. You know, especially you think about the monks who are relatively new coming into this world of, you know, structure and precepts, you know, the 223, whatever, a couple hundred rules that they're supposed to know, and the chanting they do together, and, you know, they live their lives and together. And then there's a little time each day they have to themselves, a couple hours in the afternoon, basically. And that was particularly, I mean, obviously that's the way the Buddha structured his community. And it was always, the monastic community was always in relationship to the lay community as well. And and so there's this ongoing relationship and communication. There's a, I think more in the Catholic tradition, you have like, these hermetic monastic settings where it's like they're behind these walls and they're silent and you can't visit them. And that has a purpose. There's obviously a value in that. But the Buddhist approach is much more about community. And Ajahn Chah, who is the founder of this particular tradition, he really liked to use that setting to challenge people. Like he kind of liked it if there was like a little bit of tension going on in the monastery, like there's some monk didn't like some other monk or something, and it's like, okay, good, this will stir them up and they'll have to work with their aversion. And because again, we sort of have this idea, oh, monks, they're living together, they're just so happy. No, they're not. I mean, not that they're unhappy, but they're human beings, and some of them like each other and some of them don't like each other, and that's just part of the deal. But they don't get to say, well, I don't really like this person, so I'm going to move. It's like, no, this is where you live. And it's kind of like, and so that's the kind of discipline, right? It's entering into that kind of lifestyle. But again, just a really powerful spiritual practice, and of course it's by and large very supportive and very loving and rich, and you can imagine in a way, when you think about how we as people in recovery need each other so that we don't feel like oddities in our world, because there's, we are, right? Like there's most of the society isn't like sober and doesn't have our problem, and a lot of people don't understand it. Think about what it's like to be like, oh, I shave my head and wear an orange robe. Like, I think I need to hang out with some other people that shave their heads and wear an orange robe, because otherwise it's going to be very uncomfortable to go to town. It's going to be very awkward. Hi, what's that person walking around town with a bowl in their hand for? Like, what is wrong with them? Geez, these homeless people, why doesn't he like get a job, So, it's inspiring to see that, and to see that again, my sort of theme, that there's ways in which the recovery work parallels Buddhism and parallels, and see, here's this way in which it parallels the kind of monastic life, and I think one of the reasons the monks appreciate, I'll say me, but what I do, is because I'm abstinent, right? And for them, that's like a critical thing for them, to not use intoxicants. It's not, they recognize, I think, that sobriety and recovery is a spiritual practice that involves, first of all, letting go, which is the foundation of their life, is letting go. Right? And they recognize that there's this kind of discipline that we live by, this commitment to and really, and I think they also understand that it's not just a commitment to not using intoxicants, but we also try to not to lie, cheat, and steal, and all those other fun activities that the ordinary folks participate in. So I feel this great joy and connection with that community, at the same time that it's like so alien to me, like to actually be a monk. Like there was a time in the mid 90s, kind of just before I started to teach, I was really depressed at one point, which, occasionally happens to me, when I thought, oh, what if I just become a monk? I know lots of people have this idea, like, I'm just get out of all of this stuff. I'll just be a monk, right? But I think by then I knew enough about what it meant to be a monk to realize, oh, that's not an escape, dude. That's not getting away from anything. You think that's going to get away from your shit? No, that's just going to make your shit like even more stinky. Like you're just going to really know, like, ooh, because you're it's not like, oh, I'm depressed, I'm going to go like lie down. It's like, no, it's time for chanting. I really need a snack. I'm sorry, you had lunch. That's not, there's no lunch. Oh God, like I could really use like a movie. No, we don't do that. Could we put on some music, please? No, we don't listen to me. It's very simple life. Okay, and not for me. I admire it, but not my lifestyle. Well, that wasn't what I was going to talk about tonight, by the way. That just happened in the last 3 minutes of my meditation. So just wind me up. But I was going to actually read a little bit from my workbook, and I think I have enough time to read a little bit of this. We'll see how far I get. Maybe hopefully there's like a natural place to stop. So this is called Buddhism and the 12 Steps Workbook. If you're not familiar with it, it's just something I self-published, funky little book. It's kind of a collection of a lot of my thoughts about how to work with this process. And before the book goes into the steps, I go into some teachings around mindfulness. And this is just a section called Mindfulness Meditation. A great deal has been written and said about mindfulness in recent years. This ancient spiritual tool has become trendy. And like all trends, people try to simplify it and package it in appealing and marketable ways. It's great that mindfulness has become popular, but vital if we're going to engage in this path that we understand its full implications. While the basic idea of mindfulness can be fairly easy to grasp, integrating it into our lives and learning to use it in meditation is a lifetime's practice. I was first introduced to the concept of mindfulness in the spring of 1980. I'd already been practicing another form of meditation for 2 years and was interested in spirituality, even though I hadn't even begun to address my addiction. Excuse me. So while I had a sincere desire to change, I was really in the early stages. 5 years before I got sober, so that's early. At that point in my life, I'd been making my living as a club musician for almost 10 years, but had recently taken a day job working in a health food store in Santa Monica, California. The produce manager had gone on a meditation retreat with Joseph Goldstein, and every time we had a break, he and I and a few others would slip out the side door to hear him rave, if not rant, about what an amazing experience it had been sitting and walking silently for 10 days in the desert. He'd been on a retreat out at Joshua Tree, I think. Under all my spiritual longing was essentially a desire not to feel pain in my life, the depression, anxiety, and craving that seemed to follow me around. This was, of course, the same desire that drove my drinking and using. So when I heard about the meditation retreat, a lot of what I was interested in was the magical stuff, how high you could get. But as I began to study more, and when I got a hold of Joseph's book, The Experience of Insight, which I recommend, what gave me real hope and trust in what he was teaching was how much sense it all made. Sure, there were mystical Zen stories and poems of enlightenment, but what ran through all of it was a practical, logical, and sensible understanding and approach to life. And the most basic element of that approach was the practice of mindfulness that simply said, you need to be present to pay attention to what's happening right now if you want to grow and change. What could be more sensible? This wasn't about transcendence or faith, not God or even enlightenment, but rather about a simple tool for awakening in the present moment. In Joseph's most recent book, simply called Mindfulness, which I also highly recommend, he says that trying to briefly define mindfulness is like trying to briefly define art or love. Well, that's probably true. I feel that I have to give you something to start with. So here goes. Mindfulness is a focused, non-judgmental awareness of what is happening in the here and now. It is a level of present moment awareness that takes us deeper than our common daily perceptions. It helps us to see our reactivity, our habitual thoughts and emotional patterns, to engage in our sense life more intimately, and to let go of the stresses of our daily lives. Not a completely satisfying definition, but mindfulness can be practiced in any waking moment, in any posture, and potentially in any situation. However, setting aside time to formally practice mindfulness meditation is essential to developing any kind of broader mindfulness. Mindfulness meditation gives us the immediate benefit of calm and concentration that arises when we intentionally focus our attention, and it gives the ongoing benefit of strengthening our ability to be mindful and our understanding of the subtleties of mindfulness. Regularly practicing mindfulness meditation greatly increases the likelihood that any given moment we will remember to be mindful, which may be the most difficult aspect of the practice. Mindfulness isn't about fixing ourselves, but initially at least about accepting who we are. It helps us to see into our own minds and the ways that we undermine ourselves, and gives us the opportunity to make new choices based on our own wisdom. My early experiences of mindfulness exposed me to the many ways I was missing my life. Mindful eating intensified my pleasure in tasting even the simplest foods. Mindful walking connected me with my own body, how I held myself, and the tension that I often allowed to sit in my body. Mindfulness of thoughts showed me how much of the time I spent planning, dreaming, fantasizing about how the future was going to be better than this moment. Soon I learned that I wasn't unique in any of this. I think that's enough reading. So, there's a couple more pages on this, but it's a topic obviously that I'm engrossed in and daily involved in, personally and professionally, if you will. And it's striking to me how often I feel like the practice isn't really understood. And I've mentioned this a couple times recently, and you might have heard me say this early in my own practice, being when I did start to go on retreat, and with Joseph Goldstein and Jack Kornfield. I remember sitting in interviews with them when I would be telling them the struggles I was having in my meditation, and they would constantly point me back to, well, can you just be aware of that? Kind of like the therapist who keeps saying, how does that make you feel? It's just like, and always wanting them to give me instructions about how to control my experience. And what they're trying to get at over and over is, this is not about controlling your experience. I mean, you can try to do that, and it's not that you that isn't sort of part of your life. But the point of this is learning to be with your experience, to be present for it, to be non-reactive to it, to investigate it, to explore it, not to fix it. And that's a really difficult idea to fully take in. We just have such a natural way of being that is about trying to control what's going on. I mean, don't get me started on addiction, because obviously that's like a really extreme case of that. But just for ordinary people, for anybody, that's what we try to do. We try to control our environment. We try to control our lives in many different dimensions, right? And when we look inside in meditation, we try to control that. And, that's not what mindfulness is about. And that doesn't mean that mindfulness doesn't have some effect on it. And you could say that in the end, we do wind up controlling in a way what's happening, but not by going directly at the thing that we want to control. Like, oh, there's all this thinking. Well, I'm just going to make it stop. No, that's not how we do it. We just go to the breath. We open, we allow, we accept. We don't fight. We just sit with, we let it be there. And eventually, as the concentration grows, then the calming happens just organically out of that. So it's kind of like we go at things in a sideways or backdoor direction in terms of control. We control things by letting go of control. So that's the paradox. But it's further. I mean, that's not all of meditation. Another thing I've been reflecting on today was one of the 7 factors of enlightenment. The second of them is called investigation of states. Sort of odd turn of phrase, investigation of states. I'm not sure what the Pali is for that. Something I should look at. But this is, kind of what we do with mindfulness. The first, in the 7 factors, the first factor of enlightenment is mindfulness. And then the second factor is investigation of states. So it's kind of, we can see that it's directly tied to mindfulness. And again, it's not about controlling states or creating states. It's investigating states of mind, states of body, states of emotion, states of energy, states of feeling, states of perception. And, this is kind of I was thinking about this particularly in relation to step 4. It's kind of the meditative Buddhist parallel to step 4, where we do this investigation or inventory of our states. And then, we have the things like the 5 hindrances as a model for how to do that, like how to categorize the states, right? Very kind of Buddhist lofty language and dry language, that we're investigating states, like we had a magnifying glass on our brain, or magnifying glass on our thoughts. But this is just like the heart of this practice is that investigation. And again, very tricky, because when you say investigate states, very quickly we go into thinking about the states, trying to figure out the states, again, trying to control the states, wondering why they're there, and on and on and on. And that none of those things are what investigating states is. Investigating states is just look real close. And there's a couple things, yes, you're meant to see. Notice causality, how states arise, how they end. Notice impermanence. Notice how states do arise and do end. So they're not static, despite their English term, which suggests something static. States are not static. Notice their unsatisfactory nature, right? That you can't hold on to any pleasant states. And notice their not self nature. Notice that your states are not you. right? So this is investigation of state, seeing the Dharma within our own personal experience, seeing the impersonal through the personal, right? So this is the work of mindfulness, is to look and to see all this. And it's, it's time consuming, like decades time consuming. I mean, I always think it's interesting that, a monk in Thailand becomes an ajahn, which means they're like a teacher now, after 10 years of being a monk. During that 10 years, they're doing a lot of meditating. They have a 3-month retreat every year, 10 of those, plus all the other stuff they do. So if you think like you're going to jump to the front of the line, you want to probably chill and take it easy. Just keep showing up. It's what we do in our recovery program. It's like you can't speed up your recovery. You ever try doing that? Yeah, that doesn't work. No, you just keep showing up one day at a time, and it unfolds, and you become who you become. So I've used up almost all the time by sort of giving 2 talks. So I don't know if you get bonus, bonus recovery points for listening to all that. Yeah. Since there are no actual recovery points, it really doesn't matter. It's like, you get double times 0, 2 times 0. Jonathan Kaminga's number. So, but I will hang out for a few minutes since I didn't leave any time. I know some people might need to go, so I respect your need if you need to go, but I will hang out for a few minutes if anybody wanted to chime in or ask a question or say something. If not, but anyway, yes, if so, please speak now. You can raise a hand or just unmute yourself. Oh, is that the Pali word for investigation? Vichaya? I don't know. Could be. Oh yeah, Abhayagiri. Thank you, John. I was going to talk about that. Abhayagiri means, Abhaya means fearless. Giri means mountain, fearless mountain. And it's actually the name of an ancient monastery in Sri Lanka. There were 2 monasteries there. I think Amaravati was the other one, which is what the monastery in England is called. And they were like kind of competing, and over time, they I'm looking at what the latest chat. Oh, thank you. Yes. They kind of would rise and fall in influence depending upon the royal family in Sri Lanka. And we're talking a couple thousand years ago. This is going on, and I'm not sure if they still exist. Probably, but Abhayagiri was that's why I think that's why they named it that. And it is, if you've been there, Abhayagiri is on a hillside of, you could call it the mountain. So fearless. And this, if you've ever seen a Buddha with the hand up like that, that's like one of the mudras. So that's called the Abhaya mudra, the fearless mudra. Like when you put your hand up, like, right? It's a way of saying, I am open, and I am non-harming. I'm not going to harm you, and you can come at me if you so wish, even though I would prefer that you wouldn't. Oh, there you go. Thank you, Gail, for the abhaya, the hand, the abhaya hand. Well, if nobody's going to speak up.
Kevin?
Yes.
I'm Sharon.
Yeah. Hi.
I've been here in the past, but I haven't been here for a long time. But I have been in a group that's studied, your book on Buddhism and the 12 steps, and I continue to do that and listen to many of your meditations. So it's a real pleasure to be here with you tonight.
Thanks.
I just have a question about, I was really struck when you were talking about meditation and how we can investigate or observe or just pay attention to how we undermine ourselves. If you could say something more about that, I feel that's something that I struggle with, even though I've been.
That was like a line that I read, right?
Yes.
Like we see how we undermine ourselves. Yeah. So, what one of the first things we're doing with this practice is we're kind of pointing a light at the thoughts in our mind. We're not just trying to like have a peaceful morning or have some bliss experience. Munindra, who was Joseph Goldstein's teacher, told him once, if you want to understand your mind, sit down and look at your mind. And that was the thing that really Joseph found really inspiring. Like, because Joseph had studied philosophy at Columbia, and it was like he didn't feel like he knew anything about his mind. And Munindra just said, well, just look at your mind. So look at your thoughts, start to notice what you're thinking, and it requires this sort of stepping back a little bit, which is one of the aspects of mindfulness, right? There's this kind of observing quality of mindfulness. So as opposed to just going, oh, I'm thinking, let me come back to my breath, for a moment, look at, well, what was that thought? And you can do that when you're meditating. You can do it when you're not meditating, because a lot of times when we're not meditating is when the most dysfunctional things come through. You like drop something on the floor and you're like, oh, I'm such an idiot. And you're like, oh, well, that's an interesting, you start to notice things like that, right? Like, oh, look at the beliefs that I'm expressing and these thoughts in my mind that are often, I can call them subconscious or just unrecognized. They're just thoughts that kind of pass through the mind. When we bring them into consciousness, we can start to challenge them and say, actually, no, I'm not an idiot. I made a mistake. It was an act, but I'm not an idiot. And start to see how we talk to ourselves, right? The so-called inner critic. And so we perform an intervention on ourselves, right? We intervene in those thought processes and stop them. When we see them, we go, no, that's not okay. Like, what one friend of mine, when I say something mean about myself on the golf course, like, oh God, that was a terrible shot, he'll be like, don't be mean to my friend. He's like a little bit of a new age guy, but it's a sweet thought, And I was thinking that today, actually, but at some point, like, don't be mean to my friend, So yeah, it's just really about observing and intentionally. Intentionally sort of both challenging and then maybe even replacing the thoughts. Like, that's not true. Here I have evidence that that's not true. That this is essentially how cognitive behavioral therapy works, and so it's why the people who created mindfulness-based cognitive therapy did so, because they realized, oh, mindfulness is a tremendous support to cognitive therapy, because it cultivates this awareness of thoughts in a more intentional way, so that then you can have this kind of intervention. Yeah. So I hope that's of some help. All right. Thanks. So Julie, hi.
Hello, everybody. Great to be with you tonight. I just love this gathering. I'm really glad you brought up control, because I think there's, for me, the distinction between controlling and there's a difference between the kind of control where I'm clinging to the result, I'm clinging to the outcome, and the kind of control that is kind of like nurturing, trying to inform my heart mind, to be aligned with a certain set of values, or cultivate that which is wholesome and benevolent and beneficial, and those wise efforts and wise views that we try to cultivate. In a sense, that's control. And when a good seed is watered to try to sustain that, those to me are all kind of mechanisms of control. But I'm not, when I'm not clinging to the result, the outcome, and thinking, oh, that
Right.
didn't happen, that's bad, and just being with what is, it's just a different kind of control. But I was really glad that because I haven't really heard anybody talk about, well, everything is kind of some form of control, and that's not exactly what you said, but it
Right.
really,
Right.
your message resonated with me big time.
Yeah, it is a very natural human thing. That's how people stay alive. But I don't, what you're talking about in a way is stepping back then into effort and the nature of effort. And and maybe it's just how we're defining the term, but for me, control has a taste of craving within it, because if I'm trying to control something, I'm trying to control the outcome. Whereas effort that isn't trying to control the outcome, for me, isn't control. It's right effort. And so it kind of points to the two different Pali words. The word tanha is the craving or the thirst that's kind of behind control, whereas chanda is really right intention, and it's a skillful effort. So there's definitely a distinction. I mean, you can certainly, I wouldn't argue with you about how you're defining control, but it's not quite how I use it. And I feel like, I mean, I think the important thing is the distinction that you're making, that we're both making, between the attachment to results and the letting go of results. That's the key thing, whether we call it control or right effort, it's the same. That's the issue. And and yeah, I mean, it's just what we live with, and it's really at the heart, because tanha, craving, is the second noble truth. It's the cause of suffering. So observing that is like the key thing in letting go of suffering. Everything else, without that, you don't get anywhere, right? Because and it's, in the 12 steps, it's step 3. And it's really kind of the launching pad of the 12 steps. Once you get sober, I'm powerless. Okay, now I'm turning my will and my life over. It's like, okay, boom, we're on our way. And that's when people are really usually becoming engaged in the program. And I know there's a lot of challenges people face around the language of that. But I think for me, I let go of the language part of it and just look at the process part. And I think it's talking about right effort. I think that's exactly what the third step is. It's right effort. And yeah, thank you. So thank you all for coming, showing up on Friday night.